A patchwork of soybean and cornfields stretches across the plain of Blue Earth County, Minnesota. The campus of Minnesota State University is in Mankato, the seat of the county. It's attracted a small community of immigrants. In 2012, the county voted for President Barack Obama. In 2016, it pivoted to President Donald Trump. Abdi Sabri is a Somali immigrant. He's the first person of color elected to the Mankato School Board. The Democrat says the evolving demographics of the county are at the root of its political whiplash in 2016.
That really gives a lot of my our white brothers and sisters a lot of anxiety. That change for generations they've lived in, they feel a sense of belonging and privilege in the system. So that being threatened was something that Trump exploited.
A 20-minute drive away on the Duncanson family farm, they're harvesting the last acres of corn sold to make ethanol.
The pro-business, anti-regulation mindset of the Trump administration, I appreciate. We don't like people telling us how or what to do. There's a sense of freedom out here.
Agriculture and hog production are the economic drivers of Blue Earth County. The population is about 90% white, according to U.S. Census data. The county's biggest city, Mankato, is the site of the largest mass execution in American history. In 1862, 38 members of the Dakota tribe were hung after the U.S.-Dakota war trials. Gwen Westerman is Dakota and the director of the Humanities Department at the university.
We have to acknowledge the injustices of the past.
According to Native News Online, the Native American vote could be a factor in swing states such as Minnesota. There has been a robust national get-out-the-vote push.
That's one way that our voice can be heard, is to vote and participate in the process and get in there and help make those changes.
The locals say you won't see many campaign lawn signs or hear arguments about the election. Though they may disagree about politics, what people value more is what binds them together as neighbors. Natasha Ghoneim, Al Jazeera, Blue Earth County, Minnesota.
Well, let's now speak to Jamie Fly. He's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and he was also formerly an advisor to Republican U.S. Senator Marco Rubio. He joins us now from Berlin. Jamie, thanks for being with us. I do know for many people outside the U.S., it does seem crazy that this whole election rests on a very small group of voters in just a few states. And this time around, a few traditionally red states do seem to be leaning blue. Do you think that's because of the choice between Trump and Biden, or is it because we're seeing a changing, more diverse electorate?
I think it's related to both those factors. As you noted, this election has generated passions on both sides. And so we have the potential that we're not just dealing with some of the traditional swing states, which have been contested now over the last several decades, places like Ohio, Florida, parts of the Rust Belt. But there are other states that people are openly discussing possibly flipping, places like Texas, perhaps Arizona. And some of that is just the energy, especially on the Democratic side in opposition to President Trump. But some of it's also related to changing demographics in a number of those states where some of the Democratic Party's core constituencies are a growing segment of the electorate, and the Democrats have invested a lot of energy in this cycle in actually trying to draw those voters to the polls.
Mm-hmm. Well, two states that we're all going to be watching very closely tonight, Florida and Pennsylvania, especially given their number of electoral college votes and the polling margins that we're seeing there. President Trump is now already insisting the counting of ballots beyond tonight, which is standard practice, is illegitimate. Do you think this is all going to end up in court?
It very well could, and that would not be unprecedented. American presidential elections have often been litigated, certainly in 2000 with Bush versus Gore. But even when it was not over the actual determining votes, there are always issues related to voter access and a number of congressional races that often end up in the courts. I think the real challenge is going to be in Pennsylvania. In Florida, my understanding is that Florida starts counting its early pre-election day votes. In Pennsylvania, because of a number of state practices, a lot of those votes, the mail-in ballots, won't actually be counted probably until election night or even the day after. And especially given how tight the margin was last time, where it was less than 1%, which Trump took the state, you could have a very tight margin, and those mail-in ballots could actually sway the election. And that's why it's going to be incredibly difficult if the election does come down to Pennsylvania to really determine very quickly what the outcome is.
So let me ask you then, Jamie, how much of a landslide would this election need to be for Biden in order to avoid a lengthy court battle going forward?
I think the big question will be what happens in Florida. If Biden is able to capture Florida, the electoral map for President Trump becomes very difficult. It's not impossible, but if President Trump can hold on to Florida, and we'll know fairly early after the polls close in Florida and the count in Florida begins, and I think Florida has a history, despite the mess in 2000, of counting relatively quickly. If we know the outcome in Florida, that will be an early indication of some of the trends and whether this is all going to come down to Pennsylvania ultimately. Though a couple other states, if there's a major upset in places like Georgia, Texas, states that you would expect President Trump to carry, but he does not, that could also make the whole map less reliant on Pennsylvania and give us an early indication of what's going on.
Well, so much of this comes down to the Electoral College, which in itself is pretty controversial. I know many would argue that the Electoral College actually disenfranchises voters in non-swing states because most campaigning ends up being focused on those areas and other issues that are important to voters elsewhere. They get put aside. Do you personally think the Electoral College system should still exist?
I think it's a quirky system that's difficult to explain to people, but I do think it ultimately works. I think the founders established this system for a reason. America has always been divided by urban centers and large rural spaces of America that are rural. There was a desire to make sure that you didn't just have people in the cities who had all the political power. And I think, honestly, that's going to continue to be a challenge in American politics as the country and the demographics change. And so I think some of what you've seen with Donald Trump's election is a bit of that rural backlash, non-college educated Caucasians coming out in force to support him. And even if the Democrats are triumphant in this election and take the Senate and complete control of Congress, I think many Republicans and many people who supported someone like Donald Trump are going to still want to place a lot of faith in the system to protect their interests. And that's going to be even more important if you have one party controlling the White House and both houses of Congress.
Jamie Fly there, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Great to get your insights here on Al Jazeera. Thanks for being with us, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.